or at least about the relationship of inner life and external agendas. In the Wesleyan movement, the emphasis on sanctification led, of course, to what we sometimes think of soup, soap, and salvation, you know, kind of 3S, that Methodism was about. You know, once you realize that you're a dead sinner, once Christ comes in, man, you got to clean up, right? You got to clean up. And so there's this emphasis on the cleaning up of the inner life. But all the Methodists, all those evangelical Anglicans began to realize that these people were living in hovels and that you couldn't just clean up the inner life. That, in fact, many of these people would come to Bible studies in church, and then they would go back home, and there'd be one bed, and all the family sleeping in that bed in shifts, and a great deal of incest and a great deal of, you know, disease and problems and all kinds. So you should think of evangelical 18th century evangelical sanctification movement as beginning inward and flowing outward without any boundary. In 20th century evangelicalism, we have a sort of piety, and then we view social ministry as an add-on. Oh, we should add that to our agenda. In the 18th century, it was not an add-on. It was a starting point to start with the person, but you don't quit. So it is not enough to bring slaves to Jesus. You have to set them free. And so the most natural thing is to form abolition societies. That's just as spiritual as forming Bible societies. And so the evangelicalism of the 18th century, growing out of sanctification rather than justification, tended to move right on out to sanctified environments, cleaning up the community, cleaning up alcoholism and drug abuse, and all of those things was seen to be the extension of sanctifying the individual. There was no gap between them. And I think that's quite distinctive. That's certainly different from the way the 20th century viewed that. But the 18th and 19th, it was just normal. For example, the founder of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, A.B. Simpson, was doing all his ministry in Hell's Kitchen, New York. And Norris Magnuson writes about that magnificently. The stuff D.L. Moody was doing and Simpson was doing and all these people in his book called Salvation in the Slums by Norris Magnuson. In the 19th century, we didn't have that gap between personal and public theology. Evangelicalism began with conversion, and then it moved right out to convert the society. Part of that was that the dispensationalist and modernist fundamentalist gap had not occurred. And that's part of what I want to talk about tomorrow, because that has devastated the way we look at this thing. Eschatology does make a difference, and if you believe the world's just going to get worse and worse and worse, obviously there's no attempt to clean it up, and therefore you just deal with souls. But that's not how the 18th century viewed it, and they didn't have that eschatology. They had a kind of quiet, patient eschatology. The Lord is going to come, and we're going to help make the world ready for him. There was much more of a kind of post-mill view of things, or an a-mill even, than a pre-mill. Also, I think in this fundamentalist modernist controversy, one of the things that happened is that the social gospel people decided to do social ministry. And so we reacted in horror and went the other direction and just ignored it altogether. And so people who lived before 1900, or especially 1920, when the splits really started to occur, were really didn't have to worry about things like this. They could do Bible studies and abolitionism at the same time, and nobody thought that was strange. They thought it was perfectly normal. in fact. So that's one thing I want you to understand. The dynamic of 18th century revivalism wasn't just to preach, but it was also prophetic. It was transforming persons, and then beginning with the person, transforming society. And it wasn't like I've heard some people say, just get people converted and they will transform society, as though that's a separate thing. It's transform persons and mobilize them to transform society. And that was clearly the 18th century dynamic. Tomorrow, I want to move to the U.S. I'll talk about Indian missions, the Hispanic and other settlements, and we'll move into early, the colonial and the Great Awakening and some of those things that and we'll try to move right up into the 20th century, but obviously 350 years, we'll be back to the drop your pencil, miss a decade or two tomorrow. But we'll be on more and more familiar turf, I think, because all of these issues we've had up to date now get played out in our own scene, and so tomorrow will be about that. What I'd like us to do now is to get into some small groups, and maybe the best way to do that is just at the most, maybe the three of you would take chairs and join the three of them, or, you know, just gather around the tables front and back. And what I'd like you to do is maybe a couple things. One, share what new issues are emerging for you, or issue is emerging for you in the light of church history. Is there any character or any period, any event that has intrigued you thus far that you'd like to say more about or know more about? That's one kind of quick go-around. You might do that in the group. Another is I'd be very interested that you begin to share your map with one another. That is, you begin not necessarily to show them a drawing, but say some of the antecedents of my pilgrimage are this or this or this, and begin to share some of that and see how that might work. Any questions you have also that you'd like to ask, that you could put in writing, that you'd like to know more about, and maybe for some time tomorrow, if we have this kind of time, I could collect those, and that would shape some of the way I use time tomorrow. So that would be a third agenda. Are there any lingering questions, things you'd like to know more about as a group, and write it down and hand it to me, and I'll be happy to collect them. Is that okay? And while we're in the groups, she's going to come around and take your pictures. So smile at the camera, and the people will know who was in this course. There'll be a record for all time and all history. 1,000 years from now, Navigator people will be looking at this and yeah.
As far as my spiritual pilgrimage, the people that I identify most with would be the Anabaptists, and this would be really the first things in Calvin that I really identified with. Some things in the Anabaptists that I really otherwise have no idea. And even people that I came to Christ through were Anabaptists in their grace program. A sense of community and story. I could go Calvinist or Wesley. I really like Wesley. What's that?
It's going to be on film.
Actually, Wesley at this point is that's modeling our ministry. Wesley's coal mine celebrating.
Is this good? I mean, it's like the
So I was thinking about, well, what is the deal with the suburb type people? Just let them go to hell? I mean, it's almost what I'm hearing. So maybe I need to learn. What does anyone think about the suburbs? What kind of issues are involved? Where is the community in the suburbs? Like in a city, everybody lives around each other. In the suburbs, everybody lives together. They all live in a house or something. They don't have to come out for any So how they administer in a suburban setting. So I think that might be an issue. Instead of just feeling uneasy about it, maybe there's some stuff I can learn. And I mean, from his perspective, it's good. He's bringing us, I think, back towards the middle. So we're aware of it. Instead of feeling bad, it's like, hey, there's people here too. How do we get to God?
Interesting to ask him what he thinks. This is probably thought about it.
That might be my question. They want to have any question on that. So when you sit in the middle,
I mean, I'd be curious to hear what he'd say after everything he said. Sort of. I don't think convicting. I was wondering about, kind of a little bit been influenced recently in the James Dawson is doing and things that are happening in Congress and whether all us Christians are losing our rights, people's rights. We're not involved at all. And frankly, I don't even know what's going on in Congress. I've never known, never even cared about this. But this seminar is and also what some of the things I've read, I've heard from Epson too. Like I said, the issue as Christians, we do need to be concerned. And that model that he had, the church influences the state. The state is responsible to take care of family. And I think that when I saw it, that is what God's
possibly revert back to my roots. I think I was impressed with his emphasis on escape. Right, rather than escaping from it. And you think that, there's so much of the system is already there. It's already set up. Particularly as you think they've been from the Catholic Church. That church, everybody I think we're going to have one done. So you look at things differently because the tendency, if you're in the Anabaptist, so it's the issue of world evangelization. And so, and I just have been really impressed with his heart. Mission and everything. So he doesn't see anything as a problem. It's almost like everything that's happening. What's happening is his point today on refugees. Most people with refugees are not really there. An opportunity for world evangelization.
That doesn't mean that our labor is raised up. Put all the people in front of staff. Need to be committed, right? Labor can be sent out. Not necessarily. They want to go over and food. They love Jesus and all that. They're gonna
culturalize our Christianity to be the American way. We really have. And it seems to be on that bandwagon, you know. I mean, I like to root for all in Europe. You know, and he's in love with that, you know. And, but it really is a disturbing thing when you see how far it's gone. And yet, how do you get it politically active and not be a patriot at the same time?
Or even the gospel that we have in terms of how we relate it to like 7 force laws and the bridge illustrations. You go over to Africa, and that approach is really not where they're at. But you talk about the spiritual, in fact, that Jesus has the power of the spiritual. Now, the gospel is very relevant because that's what they're fearful. That's what they need salvation from. And it's from the effects of their ancestral spirits in the spirit world. So, we do have I think we have to admit that we have a narrow perspective of how we look at not only the Bible, but the gospel, the message of the scriptures.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is as we've gone through the history was how the Bible is such an amazing book because no matter where people were, in terms of their needs or their culture or whatever it was, the Bible speaks to it. Whether it's a spirit world or whether it's a pragmatic view or whether it's the 18th century or whatever, the scripture, there's just something amazing about the breadth and depth of the scripture that allows us to go into it and find answers for the needs of our day. And a lot of theology really developed out of practical theology, it seems like, in terms of what were the issues, what were the needs, and their interpretation of the Bible, and that's where it came out. It wasn't that just set out and thought theology, it was very practical issues that they were facing. That's where it came out. So, I mean, it's just, I guess my appreciation for the depth of the scripture has been increased.
We're sharing different issues that come alive during the seminar. There's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
I was picking that up.
So you can share whatever you like from 2 days or 3 days.
I think we ought to call time out. Everybody's time out.
It's probably picked up on that microphone.
They approached everything from doubt. I forget the
Hume is one of the primary
It's me. I first say, I can't believe that. And I said, why I said, I can believe it. So I must be out of that mold.
He was pretty skeptical.
Yeah.
Kind of destroyed faith too. So are you pretty philosophical in your background?
I gravitate toward things like that, but I also, it's so natural to doubt first and then believe. I sometimes wonder what it's like to believe, just by nature, or even 10 minutes, a half hour, just where it would just come to me naturally. Oh, sure, I believe that instead of choosing to believe. So that's the opposite. And I know other people believe just because it's in their genes, it's in their blood. I hope the audio comes. Why, do you?
Well, no, just it was a comment that going back to that Western Eastern split, when we become so analytical. And the other thing that's come out for me is this whole thing about the poor, and just how it seems like the movements do begin with the poor or the peasants, and how the passage in James which says that God gave the poor to be rich in faith, and the Western society being more industrial, going up the middle class,
You lose that sense of faith, but many simple faith, because you become desperate when you're poor. The needs are so great. But when you're up in the thighs, you